So with our last lesson, we took a look at how we could use models to divide a decimal by a whole number. And in this lesson, we're going to look at how we can divide decimals by a whole number by using the standard algorithm. So the first problem that we're going to take a look at says this. A concrete mason separated 107 and 25 hundredths pounds of sand into three containers evenly. How much sand did he put into each container? So when we take a look at this right here is our dividend. And if you guys recall, our dividend is always going to go inside the box. I'm going to write 107 and 25, and I'm going to divide that by 3. Now, when we looked at our models within our last lesson, what we learned is we were able to take this value and then break it into 3 even parts, and each of those 3 even parts had a decimal. So what we did with the decimal when we started to move into the algorithm was we just brought the decimal straight up. So when we divide by a decimal by a whole number, all we have to do is we just have to bring our decimal straight up. And then we ignore it. We can treat it just like we did with regular division and using that standard algorithm. So I'm going to look at how many times 3 can go into 107. Now, if you're not sure how many times 3 can go into 107, break it down. So 3 can go into 10 3 times. So I'm going to multiply. Remember, we multiply. So 3 times 3 is going to be 9. I'm going to write that underneath. I'm going to subtract. I have 1 left over. I'm going to bring down my 7. 3 goes into 17 5 times. 3 times 5 is 15. I'm going to subtract. And then I have 2 left over. And I'm going to bring down my 2. 3 goes into 22 7 times. I'm going to move this up here. So I'm going to do 22, subtract 21. That leaves me with 1. And then I'm going to bring down the 5. And when I bring down the 5, 3 goes into 15. Oop, not 3 times, 5 times for 15. And then when I subtract, I have 0 left over. So my answer is going to be, it's going to be divided into 35.75 pounds of sand. Okay. We could check our answer for reasonableness on doing this is by using compatible numbers. So I could take 107 and 25, and I am actually going to round that to 120 because I know that 120 is a multiple of 3, and that leaves me with 40. 35 and 75 hundredths is near 40, so that's my answer. This right here was an overestimate because I rounded up 107 and 25 hundredths to 120. All right, let's take a look at our next problem. And so when we look at our next problem, our problem says that while out on a backpacking trip, Bradley hiked 23.6 miles in 8 hours. Okay, so there's the knowledge that I have. If he hiked the same number of miles each hour, how many miles did he hike each hour? So 8 hours, same amount each time. So that tells me I'm going to divide. So I'm going to do 8, and I'm going to divide that into 23.6 miles. First thing I'm going to do when I remember, I take a look and I see what I have for my divisor. My divisor is a whole number. So that means with the decimal, I'm just going to bring it straight up. I don't have to do anything else with it. I just bring it straight up and then I can ignore. So when we were doing addition and subtracting, we were bringing the decimal straight down. When we were multiplying, we were worrying about the decimal after. When we divide, we worry about the decimal before. So here I'm able to bring it just straight up. And then I look at how many times 8 can go into 23. So 8 goes into 23 2 times. 8 times 2 is going to be 16. And when I subtract, I am going to get 7 left over. I'm going to bring down the 6. And then what I'm going to do is I have 8 goes into 76. It's going to go in there 9 times. 8 times 2 is going to be 72. When I subtract, I have 4. Now, here's where it gets a little bit different because when we've been writing whole numbers, we've been doing it to where we would just write remainder 4. Decimal division is a lot different. We don't write remainder 4 anymore. We actually need to solve the problem or see if we can solve the problem out. So at this point in time, what I'm going to do is because I've already brought the decimal up, I have a remainder. I'm going to add a 0 and I'm going to bring it down. So I can add zeros and bring them down with decimals because I've already done my decimal placement. Forgot about it. Whole number looks a little bit different, and we'll talk about that as we move in further into this topic. So I can add a 0 and bring it down. So I look at how many times 8 goes into 40. 8 goes into 45 times. And when I do 40 subtract 40, I get 0. Okay? So my answer on this one is going to be 2 and 95 hundredths. I can check my reasonableness of my answer by doing an estimation. So I could do 24 divided by 8, use the compatible number. 24 divided by 8 is going to be 3. 3 is near 2 and 95 hundredths, so my answer is reasonable. And take a look at our guided practice. And so number 1 on our guided practice says when you divide a decimal by a whole number, where do you place the decimal point in the quotient? So when we place decimal point when we're divided by a whole number, we always place it above the decimal point in the dividend. So whenever we are dividing a decimal by a whole number, we're going to place the decimal above the decimal in the dividend. Okay. And number 2, it says in the example on the previous page, why was a 0 annexed in the dividend? So we added that 0 as we went to find the answer of 2 and 95 hundredths. We added that 0 to find the hundredths digit. So we're looking for the value of the hundredths digit in the quotient. So I can keep adding zeros. I can add as many zeros as I want to finish out the decimal problem if it's going to be a repeating or if it's going to be a terminating decimal. Okay, let's take a look at number 3. So for number 3, we're actually going to do some division. So I have 6 divided into 43 and 8/10. And so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just bring my decimal up. And when I bring my decimal up, I'm at that point done. I don't have to worry about my decimal anymore. And by moving the decimal up into the quotient, I can add as many zeros as I need to finish out the problem. So we're going to look at how many times 6 goes into 43. 6 is going to go into 43 7 times. 6 times 7 is 42. I'm going to subtract. I have 1 left over. My next step, if you remember, is to bring down the 18. I look at how many times 6 goes into 18. 6 goes into 18 3 times. So 6 times 3 is 18. I'm going to subtract, and I have 0 left over. Okay. Problem number 4. I have 4 divided into 37, and then my decimal is going to be right there. And so every time I do this, I can go ahead and I can start. So I'm gonna work this problem just slightly different than what we've seen with the problem. I'm gonna take the decimal away. So I'm gonna look at how many times 4 goes into 37. So 4 goes into 37 9 times. 4 times 9 is going to be 36. I'm gonna subtract, and I have 1 left over. Now, because we're working with decimal divisions, I'm not going to write remainder 1. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is I'm going to add my decimal after the 9 because the 9 represents my 1 place. And when I add my decimal after 9, what that gives me permission to do is it gives me a permission to add a 0 down here because I'm looking for the digits in the tens place value. So now I look at how many times 4 goes into 10. 4 is going to go into 10 twice. I'm going to multiply. 4 times 2 is going to be 8. I subtract. I have 2 left over. I don't have anything to bring down, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to add another 0. And then I'm going to look at 4 goes into 20 5 times. I'm going to multiply. I get 20, subtract, and I have 0 left over. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look, continue to work on some of these. I'm going to do a couple from your independent practice. The first one that I'm going to take a look at is number 5. 5, what I have 6 divided into 4 and 56 hundredths. So again, because I'm dealing with a whole number, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring that decimal straight up, and then I'm done. 6 is going to go into 4. 0 times. I need to mark that as a placeholder. Anytime it does, the divisor is not able to go into a digit of dividend, we need to mark it with a 0, mark it with that placeholder. So 6 goes into 0, goes into 4 0 times, and I'm going to look at how many times 6 goes into 45. 6 goes into 45 7 times. 6 times 7 is 42. I'm going to subtract. When I subtract, I end up with 3 left over. I bring down the 6. 6 goes into 36 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. I'm going to subtract, and I have 0 left over. Okay. I'm going to go to problem number 7. And so when I take a look at problem number 7, what I have is I have 7 divided into 20 and 3/10. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that decimal up, and then I'm going to forget about it and not worry about it. 7 goes into 20 twice. That's 14. Again, I'm going to subtract. I have 6 left over. I bring down my 3. 7 goes into 63 9 times. 7 times 9 is 63. I'm going to subtract. I have 0 left over. Alrighty, so let's take a look at number 9. So I'm going to take a look at number 9 on your independent practice. So I have 19 divided by 5, so I'm going to go ahead and put it into the box. So 19 is my dividend, so it goes inside the box. 5 goes outside the box. 5 is going to go into 19 3 times. 5 times 3 is going to be 15. I'm going to subtract. I have 4 left over. Now, I'm not going to write remainder 4. I'm actually going to work the problem out. I'm going to have a decimal quotient. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place a decimal right here. And remember, when I place that decimal right here, what that gives me permission to do is to add as many zeros as I can. You can add the zeros up here and then bring them down. Or what I like to do is I like to simply write the 0 right next to it and then just add the zeros as I go. 5 goes into 40 8 times. 5 times 8 is 40. When I subtract, I have 0 left over as a remainder. Take a look at one more. So the last one we're going to take a look at is at number 11. So I have 48 and 62 hundredths, and I'm dividing that by 2. I'm going to look at this time. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that decimal straight up. I'm not going to look at how many times 2 goes into 4. I'm going to look at how many times 2 goes into 48. 2 goes into 48 12. Oh, not 12 times, 24 times. And so 2 times 24 is going to be 48. I subtract. I have 0 left over. I bring down the 6. So I don't always have to start with the ones place or start with my first digit. If I know the value or what I can multiply the divisor here, like here it was 2 times 24, I can go ahead and do that and save myself a step. If you need to do it number by number, go ahead and do it number by number. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 2 times 3 is going to be 6. I'm going to subtract. I have 0 left over. I'm going to bring down the 2. 2 goes into 2 1 time. That's 2. Subtract. I have 0 left over. Practice, math practice, and problem solving. I'd like for you to do problems 6, 8, 10, 12, and let's just go ahead and make it easy. You're just going to do 6 through 16 even. And then I'd like for you to do problem 17, 19, and 22. So you're going to do 6 through 16 even, 17, 19, and 22. So really working on that decimal skill and remembering to just bring up that decimal and then using the division algorithm like normal and adding zeros to work out the rest of the problem so you have a decimal remainder instead of a whole number remainder.